The sun had just risen, casting warm rays over the Evergreen Heights neighborhood. Rows of maple trees lined both sides of the street, their gentle shade swaying slightly in the soft morning breeze, carrying the faint fragrance of blooming flowers from nearby gardens. It was a peaceful morning, but David Carter was never the kind of person who had time to enjoy such moments. As a 32-year-old lawyer, I was far too familiar with rushed mornings. Standing in front of the mirror, I adjusted my tie, smoothed out my navy blue suit, and headed to the garage. One of the things I took the most pride in was my black 1967 Ford Mustang, a passion of mine since my law school days. I opened the door, started the engine, letting its powerful roar echo before speeding off down the tree-lined streets of Evergreen Heights. Evergreen Heights was a prestigious residential community, home to successful professionals, entrepreneurs, and wealthy retirees who had chosen it as their place of residence. The neighborhood was picture-perfect, with classic two-story houses, white picket fences, and neatly trimmed lawns, resembling scenes straight out of a postcard. But there was one thing every resident knew: if you wanted to live in peace, it was best not to attract the attention of the HOA. The HOA, the Homeowners Association, might sound like an organization dedicated to maintaining order and aesthetics, but in reality, it functioned more like a miniature government with absolute power. Absurd rules, unreasonable fines, and excessive control had made the HOA a thorn in the side of many residents. And at the head of it all was Karen Whitmore. Karen, a woman in her mid-50s, was the kind of person you didn't want to cross. Her blonde hair was always meticulously styled, and she constantly wore elegant dresses, yet her gaze was cold and judgmental. Whenever she walked by, residents would avert their eyes because everyone knew she always had a reason to fine them. Your grass is too tall, violation of community regulations. Your trash bin is an inch out of place, $200 fine. Your car has a bit of mud on it, hurts the neighborhood's aesthetics, $100 fine. No one in the community could escape Karen's scrutinizing eyes. To her, Evergreen Heights had to be a perfect neighborhood, by her standards, and anyone who didn't comply would pay the price. I had never had issues with the HOA before. I kept my house tidy, followed the rules, and avoided unnecessary trouble. But I soon realized that in Evergreen Heights, you didn't have to do anything wrong to become a target. HOA would find a reason to make trouble for you. And I had no idea that Karen was about to set her sights on me. That day was just like any other. I drove to the office, buried myself in work, and returned home as dusk settled in. Pulling up to my house, I turned off the engine and leaned back in my seat for a moment, taking in the quiet of the neighborhood. But then, I noticed a figure standing not far away, staring directly at me. Karen. She stood with her arms crossed, her sharp gaze like that of a supervisor inspecting a careless employee. I raised an eyebrow but dismissed it, stepping out of my car and heading inside. I didn't know that moment was the warning sign of all the trouble to come. The next morning, I woke up as usual, brewed a hot cup of coffee, and opened the front door to grab the newspaper. But instead of just the morning paper, a white envelope with the HOA logo sat prominently on my doorstep. I frowned, picked it up, and unfolded the letter inside. Violation notice. David Carter. You have violated Evergreen Heights parking regulations. According to Section 5, Clause 3 of the Community Rulebook, personal vehicles may not be parked outside the garage for more than 12 consecutive hours. As a result, you have been fined $500. Failure to pay within 7 days will result in further action from the HOA. Sincerely, Karen Whitmore, the President. I let out a dry chuckle. This was clearly ridiculous. I had always parked right in front of my house, a perfectly legal spot. More importantly, I had read the rulebook thoroughly, there was no clause prohibiting parking the way I had been doing ***. Leaving my steaming coffee behind, I headed straight to the HOA office. Karen sat behind her desk, staring at me with a cold, unwelcoming gaze. Is there a problem, David? She asked, her voice sharp. I placed the violation notice on her desk. I received this morning. I'd like to know why I'm being fined. Karen picked up the letter, skimming through it as if she were seeing it for the first time, then looked up with a forced smile. You violated the regulations. The rules are clear. Personal vehicles cannot be parked outside the garage for more than 12 hours. I crossed my arms, keeping my tone calm. I've read the rules, and I don't see any clause prohibiting parking the way I've been doing. If you can show me exactly where I'm in violation, I'll comply. Karen's expression flickered for a brief moment, but she quickly regained her composure. Perhaps you haven't reviewed the latest version of the community guidelines. I suggest you go over them again and follow the rules. I let out a dry chuckle. Then would you mind showing me the latest version? Karen hesitated for a second before pulling a thick folder from her drawer. I quickly flipped to the parking regulations section, and just as I suspected, there was no rule against parking the way I always had. I looked up at her. Care to explain why I'm being fined? Karen pressed her lips together, irritation flashing in her eyes. You're wasting my time, David. If you refuse to pay the fine, I can escalate this with photographic evidence to the HOA board. I held back a sigh. I knew she was deliberately making this difficult. But pushing back too hard now would only complicate things further. Fine. I'm not paying this ridiculous fine. I turned and walked out of her office, but I knew, this battle was just beginning, When I got home, I decided to dig deeper into the HOA and Karen. I had heard plenty of complaints from other residents, but no one had ever truly stood up against her. I scrolled through the neighborhood forum, reading anonymous posts from frustrated homeowners. Karen keeps raising HOA fees without any clear explanation. I got fined $200 just for a tiny stain on my driveway. They towed my car without any warning. Then, I stumbled upon something interesting. Karen had ties to a private towing company. This company frequently received contracts from the HOA to tow residents' cars, and they charged outrageous fees to get them back. A bad feeling crept over me. If she was willing to fabricate a bogus fine against me, could she have something bigger planned? What I didn't know was that, within a single night, my suspicion would become reality. The sun had just risen, casting its first golden rays over the brick-paved streets of Evergreen Heights. I stepped outside, stretched, and took a deep breath of fresh morning air before starting my day. But the moment I turned toward my driveway, I froze. My Ford Mustang, My heart pounded. I quickly scanned the area, but there were no signs of a break-in. No shattered glass, no forced locks, no unusual tire marks. A sinking feeling hit me. HOA. I immediately grabbed my phone and dialed the HOA office. After just 3 rings, a voice I had come to know all too well answered, Karen. Karen, do you know anything about my Mustang disappearing? I kept my voice steady, but there was a cold edge to it. There was a brief pause on the other end before Karen's voice returned, sounding far too calm. Yes. Your car was towed this morning for a parking violation. I gritted my teeth. I wasn't violating any rules. And even if I was, the HOA has no right to tow a vehicle without prior notice. You're mistaken. Karen's voice carried a hint of smug satisfaction. According to Section 7, Clause 2 of the newly updated Evergreen Heights regulations, the HOA has full authority to tow any improperly parked vehicle. We are not required to issue a prior warning. I stood frozen for a few seconds, gripping my phone tightly. Did you just say, newly updated? That's correct. The new regulations were passed in last week's HOA meeting. I let out a cold laugh. You mean the meeting that none of the residents were notified about? The one that only you and your inner circle attended? This time, Karen didn't respond right away. But then, in a detached tone, she said, You're welcome to file a complaint, but I'm afraid the rules are the rules. I took a deep breath, trying to contain the fury rising in my chest. Fine, Karen. I'm coming to the HOA office right now. And you're going to show me every single legal document related to this. I hung up before she could say another word. Her little game had officially gone too far. 15 minutes later, I walked straight into the HOA office, where Karen sat behind her desk, a smug smirk on her face. I slammed the stack of violation notices onto her desk. All right, Karen. I want to see all the legal paperwork regarding the HOA towing my car. I want to see the minutes from the secret meeting you held to change the regulations. And I also want to know exactly who authorized my car to be towed. Karen leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms, looking utterly unbothered. Are you really this serious, David? Over a car? I scoffed. No. I'm serious because I hate people who abuse their power and think they can trample over residents just because no one speaks up. Karen raised an eyebrow, but she didn't look rattled. Instead, she pulled a folder from her drawer and placed it on the desk. Here are the meeting minutes. I grabbed the document and skimmed through it. Sure enough, the attendee list only included Karen and 3 other HOA members, the ones who always backed her decisions. I flipped to the next page, my eyes stopping at a section that had been underlined. The HOA has the right to tow any resident's vehicle for parking violations without prior notice. I clenched my fist. Karen had changed the rules to suit herself, then enforced them on everyone without caring about the resident's approval. I lifted my head and met her gaze. Fine. I won't argue anymore. Now, tell me where my car is. Karen smiled. It's at Skyway Towing's impound lot. I blinked. Skyway Towing? That name wasn't unfamiliar to me. This was a towing company notorious for shady practices. They often charged outrageous fees to release vehicles, and if owners didn't retrieve them in time, they'd auction them off. Karen hadn't just towed my car, she had sent it to a company that preyed on residents. I locked eyes with her. I will get my car back. And you're going to regret doing this. Karen just smiled mysteriously. Good luck, David. I turned and walked out of the office, but the anger in me had now transformed into something else, determination. Karen thought she could abuse her power without consequences. But she had just picked the wrong person to mess with. I walked out of the HOA office feeling incredibly frustrated. Karen had gone too far, but if she thought I would just accept it, she was sorely mistaken. First order of business, get my car back. But I knew this wasn't just about a car. Something was off about this HOA. I went back home, opened my laptop, and accessed the official website of the Evergreen Heights HOA. On the surface, Evergreen Heights seemed like a normal HOA with reasonable rules regarding home maintenance, security, and landscaping. But as I dug deeper, vague clauses started to appear. Section 7, Clause 2, the HOA has the right to take any necessary actions to maintain order within the community. The word necessary had no clear definition. That meant Karen and the HOA board could interpret the rules however they wanted. Section 12, Clause 4. The HOA has the authority to amend regulations without resident approval in the event of special circumstances. What exactly are special circumstances? No one knows, asterisk asterisk. They had granted themselves unchecked power. But that wasn't the worst part. When I checked the list of HOA's business partners, one name immediately caught my attention. Skyway Towing Official Enforcement Partner for Community Traffic Violations. Official partner? I frowned. Why would an HOA have a towing company as an official partner? Something wasn't right. I searched for information on Skyway Towing. The results left me stunned. This company had been hit with multiple allegations of illegal towing, overcharging, and even selling residents' vehicles before the legally allowed deadline. But the most suspicious part was the owner of Skyway Towing, Richard Parker. That name was extremely familiar. I went back to the list of HOA board members on the website. Richard Parker, board member of the Evergreen Heights HOA. Bingo. Karen and Richard were working together. The HOA made the rules, Skyway Towing impounded the vehicles, and residents had to pay a ridiculous amount to get their cars back. And if they couldn't afford it, Skyway Towing sold the cars for profit. This wasn't just abuse of power. This was corruption, asterisk asterisk. I needed concrete evidence to expose this scheme. I started searching for the HOA's financial reports, the place where any shady transactions between the HOA and Skyway Towing might be hidden. The only problem? The HOA's financial documents weren't public. But there was one place that was guaranteed to have a copy, the HOA office. If I wanted to bring the truth to light, I needed to find a way in and get those documents. The game had officially begun. I shut my laptop, my heart pounding. I had found a way to take Karen down. As long as I gathered enough evidence, I could take the HOA to court. Karen would have no way out. But first, I needed an army. I started reaching out to some neighbors. They had all been victims of the HOA. Mrs. Martinez ***, an elderly woman who nearly lost her home due to outrageous HOA fines. David, a mechanic who was threatened by the HOA just for parking a client's car in front of his house. The Thompson family, fined hundreds of dollars for planting a type of flower deemed inappropriate by the HOA. I met with them that evening at my house. After hearing the plan, they all nodded in agreement. We've put up with this long enough. David clenched his fist. Karen has to pay for this. Mrs. Martinez said, her eyes filled with determination. I had my team. I spent the entire night drafting a class action lawsuit. ###key points ***. The HOA abused its power by creating unlawful regulations. The HOA colluded with Skyway Towing to illegally tow vehicles and extort money. The HOA intimidated residents with vague and unfair penalties. The next morning, I sent a formal notice to the HOA, demanding a response within 7 days. That afternoon, Karen knocked on my door. She stepped inside, her face flushed red with anger. "What do you think you're doing?" she snapped. I calmly met her gaze. "I'm doing the right thing. The HOA can't keep exploiting the residents like this." Karen scoffed, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her voice. "You won't win. The HOA has the best lawyers." I walked over to the table, grabbed a stack of documents, and placed them in front of her. "The best lawyers? I'm a lawyer. And I have proof." Karen skimmed through the papers. Her face turned pale. But even when cornered, she refused to back down. "Go ahead and sue. You won't win." She turned on her heel and stormed out, but I knew she was afraid. The game had only just begun. Karen thought she could get away with it, but I wasn't going to let that happen. 3 days after I filed the class action lawsuit, I received a response from the HOA. They denied all allegations and declared they would fight to the end. Perfect. I had already prepared a secret weapon, and now it was time to use it. I officially filed a lawsuit in civil court, suing the Evergreen Heights HOA for white heavy checkmark abusing power and enforcing illegal regulations. White heavy checkmark colluding with a towing company for financial gain. White heavy checkmark causing financial harm to residents through unjust fines. The HOA immediately hired an expensive team of lawyers to defend themselves. But I wasn't worried. They didn't know who they were dealing with. The trial took place in the civil courtroom, not too large but still drawing the attention of the local media. Karen sat at the defendant's table, her eyes full of confidence. She thought I was just an ordinary resident with no understanding of the law. Her biggest mistake. When the judge asked me to introduce myself, I slowly stood up, adjusted my tie, and said, "Your Honor, my name is David Carter, an attorney specializing in civil and real estate law, and a member of the State Bar Association." I glanced at Karen. She froze, her face turning pale. She had no idea that I was a lawyer. "And today, I will prove before this court that the Evergreen Heights HOA has violated the law." "Game over, Karen." I presented all the evidence. White heavy checkmark the illegal clauses in the HOA bylaws. White heavy checkmark the connection between the HOA and Skyway Towing. White heavy checkmark the instances where the HOA unlawfully collected money from residents. The HOA's attorneys tried to counter, but they couldn't explain why a board member owned the only towing company allowed to operate in the neighborhood. In the end, the judge delivered the verdict. The Evergreen Heights HOA has abused its power and violated resident protection laws. The court orders the HOA to refund all unlawfully charged fines from the past 5 years and immediately terminate its contract with Skyway Towing. Karen panicked. She turned to her attorneys, but no one could save her now. Additionally, HOA board member Richard Parker will be investigated for financial fraud. After the trial, the residents of the neighborhood protested, demanding Karen's removal. She was forced to resign the very next day. Skyway Towing was also put under investigation for its illegal transactions. The company was shut down, and Richard Parker faced criminal charges. I stepped out of the courtroom and took a deep breath. I had won. The HOA was forced to pay restitution, Karen was removed from the board, and the towing company was under investigation. But this wasn't the end. A week after the court's ruling, the residents of Evergreen Heights received an official notice from the HOA. They would be refunded for all illegal fines from the past 5 years. When I received my compensation check, I simply smirked. Money wasn't the most important thing. Justice was what truly mattered. The residents rejoiced. They held a meeting to elect a new HOA board. No more ridiculous rules. No more fear, asterisk asterisk. Thank you. Mrs. Martinez grasped my hand firmly. You saved this neighborhood. I simply smiled. I only did what was right. Karen lost everything. She had no more power, no one feared her threats anymore. But the worst wasn't over yet. Some residents decided to sue Karen for abuse of power, demanding compensation for emotional and financial damages. She might face another lawsuit. From a tyrant who controlled an entire community, Karen was now just a lone, defeated woman. I never imagined I'd end up in court over a towed car. But this story wasn't just about an unfair fine, a towed vehicle, or a greedy HOA. It was about justice. #### lesson learned. I had witnessed how Karen and the HOA board exploited the residents' lack of legal knowledge to their advantage. They thought no one would stand up to them. But they forgot one crucial thing. When you go up against a lawyer, the bad guys can't hide. Not everyone knows the law, but the law exists to protect those who are oppressed. Corrupt HOAs should take this as a warning. I drove slowly through Evergreen Heights. No more ridiculous warning signs. No more Karen barking orders. Only peace and a free community. I smiled, pressed the gas pedal, and drove away, leaving behind a lesson the HOA would never forget. Justice had been served.